All right. How's everyone doing? Good? Enjoying the conference so far?
Yeah.
Nice. All right. You have to bear with me. I just did a talk for an hour, and my throat is a little scratchy, so we're gonna work this out. My name is Ryan Ball, Director of Engineering here at Electrona. Have my team with me, Sam and Andrew. We're going to talk about tools to manage Jamf Pro at scale. Oftentimes, us as an MSP, we have several Jamf Pro instances that we have to manage. And some of these tools, you definitely could use even if you have one Jamf Pro instance, but having multiple Jamf Pro instances, you kind of have to think about things slightly differently if you want to scale, if you want to stand up new servers, if you want to kind of make objects that are similar in multiple Jamf Pro servers. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First one up is Sam.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey, everybody. So I'll be talking about a situation that we run into on a regular basis where we bring on a new client and we have to onboard a new Jamf Pro server. So if you're in a situation like that, you know that setting up new Jamf Pro servers on a regular basis can be both a kind of a messy experience, but also time-consuming and sometimes even a frustrating experience. So we've developed a standard setup formula to take you through the steps of getting that Jamf Pro server set up in an organized fashion and bring some order to you and your team's life. So you have this new blank canvas. It's beautiful. You have nothing in it. There's just the default settings. But you want to set up an expected baseline. You want to have the settings configured the way you want. That way, when you and your team go into the Jamf Pro server, it's instantly familiar to you. And you also want to have a consistent experience across all of your Jamf Pro instances. So as you hop in back and forth in between the different servers, you know exactly what to expect. And of course, you want to get it done quickly. You don't want to spend a lot of time, maybe days, maybe even weeks, getting this new server up and running. You want to get it done fast, ideally in an afternoon. And you want to take that blank canvas and turn it into your ideal Jamf Pro server. First off, we got to get some homework done. All right. So it's a little obvious, but we want to create a unique instance name. So whether you work with Jamf support or have an automated process in place, you want to have that instance name that is unique to your client. You also want to create unique Apple IDs. That way you're not sharing the same Apple ID for different instances. So when you go to create new Jamf APNS certificates, set up your Apple School or Apple Business Manager, you're not having to shuffle things up. If you plan to use Jamf IDs inside of Jamf Pro to configure some of the settings, you might want to also create unique Jamf IDs. And if you plan to leverage email notifications in Jamf Pro, you also want to create those unique service accounts. And if you plan to forward those notifications along to Slack or Microsoft Teams, you can create those unique channels as well. All right, so now that we've got our homework out of the way, we can look at Jamf settings. So I'll try to go through this a little quickly and just look at some of the highlights of the settings that we want to touch on inside of Jamf Pro. So first off, looking at the System tab, we want to focus on users' accounts and SSO. And the idea with users' accounts is you start by creating groups and setting up permissions on a group basis. That way, when you go to down the road, adjust or remove permissions, you can adjust it for the whole group rather than having to go and change the permission for each account. And you also want to set up SSO. That way, you and your team can hop in between the Jamf Pro servers easily, and you don't have to go through Jamf Pro's native UI every time you switch servers or you get timed out in Chrome. Once you have your SSO set up, your groups configured, you can then provision your accounts for your team. If your client is using a cloud identity provider or an LDAP server, you can set that up as well. That allows you to assign a Mac to a user or use it to a Mac, easily tie those things in. And like we mentioned earlier, if you want to use email notifications, you can set up the SMTP server. The other benefit that the email notifications in Jamf Pro gives you is you can set up monthly reporting or regular reporting through advanced search groups. And the other setting we want to look at is log flushing. By default, all objects are flushed out after 3 months, and you might want to extend some of those objects out. For example, policy history, change event logs, have those extended out for a little bit further. All right, so let's look at even more settings. Starting with global settings, we want to obviously set up your APNS push certificate. That way your devices can communicate, or your Jamf Pro server can communicate with your Mac devices. You also want to set up automated device enrollment and VPP inside of Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. That way when you purchase new devices or sign or get new content, you can easily have that sync over the Jamf Pro. You also want to configure user-initiated enrollment. And one thing I want to call out here is that even if you don't plan to really enroll Macs frequently through user-initiated enrollment, if you configure your UIE to create the management account, not just enable it inside of Jamf Pro, but also create it on the Mac itself, it can cause conflicts even if you enroll through automated device enrollment. That account is created regardless of enrollment method. We also want to review the re-enrollment settings. That way, if you go to reprovision a device, you don't inadvertently have conflicts when you bring that device and re-enroll it in Jamf Pro. Next, we'll look at self-service. We believe self-service is a really powerful tool, especially in environments where your users are not administrators. This allows them to easily get to apps that they want to install easily. So inside of the Mac OS setting, we want to highlight two areas. One of them is not requiring a login for self-service. That way there's not a barrier. The user doesn't have to click and open self-service and then log into the app. They can just get right in, get to what they need. And the other area you want to focus on is changing the default landing page to be all apps. That way they can open self-service and everything that's available to them to install is instantly available. And with the spirit of user empowerment, you want to look at branding, make self-service the clients. Change the name, change the logo, have a custom header, make it instantly familiar to the client. Inside of server, all we really want to look at is the cloud distribution point. By default, Jamf Cloud is not configured, so you want to make sure to turn that on. But if you do want to configure for another cloud provider or set up a local file share distribution point, you can do that. And the last tab we'll look at is computer management. And here we want to look at check-in. We recommend setting the check-in value to be as low as possible. For example, if you're planning to have less than 500 Macs or less on this new server, set the check-in value to 5 minutes. And the idea is just that as you make changes, whether you create a policy or change a policy, you want those changes to go out immediately. You can also review the default inventory collection settings to make sure when your Macs do a recon, the right information is coming back to your server. And the last tab we'll look at here, you can barely see it on the slide, but is app updates. And just you want to make sure that Jamf is managing and enforcing updates for Mac Store apps. So that way, whether you're deploying them out through volume purchasing, or if the user goes out and downloads something from the Mac App Store, you're managing it, and its updates are being enforced through Jamf Pro. All right, so we've done a brief look at all the value or important settings that we want to configure in Jamf Pro when we set up a new server. But we also want to give something to everybody here and share a much more detailed documentation. So at the end of this talk, we'll have a link to our repo. And here we list out all these steps that we covered in a lot more detail with more context in addition to what we just covered. I recommend you take a look at the document, and if it's something that interests you, something that might be useful to your organization, that you take it, make it your own, and customize it for your environment. Don't forget, you also want to set up some local settings, user account settings, like your preferred time zone, your language, your search and inventory display settings. You want to have reminders for when your APNS token and enrollment and VPP tokens expire, so you don't miss those. If you have any service or API accounts that you want to provision, you can set those up as well. And if you plan to, or you use any existing CI or process improvement workflows, make sure you add that new instance. That way when that workflow runs in a few weeks, you don't inadvertently forget this new server. And of course, you want to discuss and plan how you're going to bring this client's Macs onto your new Jamf Pro server. Wait a minute though. We've talked about the settings, but what about the actual stuff that really matters in your Jamf Pro server? Things like scripts, extension attributes, policies, packages, even restricted software. Well, that kind of leads us into our next topic that we're going to be looking at, which is that populating these new Jamf Pro servers consistently can be a daunting experience. So if you have a lot of Jamf Pro servers, you know that getting the right objects onto all those servers, especially a new one, can be a challenging process. So follow along on how we use a template Jamf Pro server to populate new Jamf Pro servers. So we use Jamf Migrator. It's a tool from Jamf to migrate data granularly between Jamf Pro servers. It's maintained by Jamf, so as Jamf Pro evolves and macOS changes, new features are added. Of course, you're in control, so you can choose exactly what you want to migrate over. And best of all, it saves you a lot of time and money. You can get all the low-hanging fruit populated on this new server before you move on to creating your custom scripts and policies. Quick disclaimer to get out of the way. This is not going to be a Jamf Migrator tutorial, and this is not about migrating a production Jamf Pro server to another. We're also not going to be looking at migrating computers, static groups, users, or LDAP servers. Instead, this is really about the concept of leveraging having a template Jamf Pro server and using it as a source to populate this new server. So, what will we have on that template server? It should contain all the standard objects that you'd want on every Jamf Pro server you manage. That would include things like categories, extension attributes, smart computer groups, scripts, policies, configuration profiles, and more. Let's talk about best practices. So this template server should only contain generic objects that are safe to be used in another Jamf Pro server. So don't have something that's specific to one client on this template server, or things like computers. You should also have categories, and the categories should be as generic as possible. So something very specific to what it is, like productivity, web browsers, text editors. Use a good naming convention for your smart groups, your configuration profiles, your policies. That way it's clear not only to yourself, but also to your team what exactly that object contains. Don't assume everything can be migrated over, so review the README for limitations. And leave out objects that cannot be migrated. All right, so let's take a look at Jamf Migrator. So you have your source. That's going to be your template Jamf Pro server. You'll set up that with an API account. Then you have your destination. That's going to be your new server that you're going to be provisioning. You can choose to save your credentials. That way, if you come back to Jamf Migrator later, you can easily get back into migrating more objects. And the interface itself is divided into several tabs. We've highlighted the ones that we recommend you set up and migrate over with your template. So you have your General tab, macOS with all the macOS objects, iOS, and then of course the Selective tab, which is really powerful because you not only can choose exactly which category you want to choose from, but you can fine-tune exactly which objects you want to migrate if you don't want to migrate everything over. So we'll do a quick demo here of Jamf Migrator in action. Here we'll be highlighting various categories. You click go, and it simply downloads it from the template server and uploads it to a new server. And the idea here is you can do this not only with categories, obviously, but your policies, your smart groups, everything that you have on this template server, you can move over. You obviously want to make sure you don't run into dependency issues, so that make sure you move your categories over first before you have a smart group or a configuration profile that would reference that category. All right, we've talked about a lot of things in Jamf, but we haven't talked about packages. Why don't we migrate packages with Jamf Migrator? So there's a technical reason. Jamf Migrator does not migrate packages over. It only migrates package metadata. But also, we don't use packages. We use Electron Patch. not sure if anybody of you were upstairs in our talk a few minutes ago, but we talked extensively about Electron Patch. We have some material here and also at our booth. But Electron Patch allows us to not only patch our software very easily on our Jamf Pro servers, but also allows us to easily deploy and install software through automatic or self-service policies. If you were to look at a lot of our Jamf Pro servers, you'll see either 0 or very few packages on those servers. That allows us to not have to spend time packaging a bazillion software titles. And also, we can just be more effective as a team managing our Jamf Pro servers versus spending our time packaging software. All right, a little bit of review. So using a tool like Jamf Migrator allows you to easily build out standardized objects in your new Jamf Pro server. Using a setup document like we referenced earlier, and a tool like Jamf Migrator allows you to promote consistency and organization across your Jamf Pro server fleet. These tools also reduce the chance of human error. And similar to that setup document, you can also write out the steps for Jamf Migrator so that anybody on your team can follow and perform that work. And using these tools and this process is way faster than building your server out manually. And with that, I'll hand that over to Ryan.
Thanks, Sam. All right. So to kind of follow on with what Sam talked about, we're kind of discussing setting up new Jamf Pro servers at scale, how you can do that efficiently with the staff that you have on hand. So the next thing we're going to talk about are some tools that we've created in-house to help with that situation as well. So one of the problems that probably we face and everybody else faces is that Jamf Pro is not really designed to track changes in scripts. Now, there have been some updates as of recent, but I think there's still maybe some work to be had in that area, or you could leverage a tool like this. So let's take a look at one scenario here. So you've made an update to a script directly in Jamf Pro, and maybe you've broken the script. You want to revert that back to an older version, perhaps a year ago, where that data may not be in Jamf Pro, and you don't have a copy of that old script potentially. So that's one scenario. One more scenario is, say you manage dozens or more Jamf Pro servers, and you have an update to a particular script, and you want that script in every one of your Jamf Pro servers. You want to update the script contents if it exists, and if it doesn't exist, you want to actually create that script object. So how do we get here? Well, probably if you broke something in Jamf Pro with a script, you did it live. You went into Jamf Pro script editor, which is awesome, and you made a change. But again, it's not really designed to effectively track all the changes that you would want to make to a script or code. You're kind of out of luck if you want to revert to an earlier version of the script, and you see I have an asterisk there because there is some things that you can see in Jamf Pro history, but maybe you want to see some other things like understand why the change was made. You're not going to get that in Jamf Pro. Know who approved the change. That's going to be non-existent there. Make the change in multiple Jamf Pro instances. So this is key to us, right? So if you change a script live in Jamf Pro script editor, that's where the script is up to date. So really what we want to do is integrate with source control somehow. So how can we do that, right? So what is source control, first of all? It's basically the practice of tracking and managing changes in your code. Every change to the code is tracked in source control if you do it correctly. The entire history of changes you can see, right? From initial commit to current. You can roll back to an earlier version of the code because, again, you have the entire history chain of changes. And source control serves as the source of truth, right? That's the idea behind source control in many cases is, you have a production version of the script that should be the latest version in source control. And if for some reason you have something different in Jamf Pro, somehow you want to update Jamf Pro, right? So as far as source control goes, these are some solutions you've probably heard of: GitHub, Bitbucket, Visual Studio Team, FS. Maybe you haven't heard of that, but that does exist and it is popular. And also GitLab. So what we did is we wanted a tool that we could use to update scripts in a remote repository in source control and then push those updates to either one or more Jamf Pro server. There is a tool that existed, and we kind of basically created a separate version of this because it's kind of out of date. So Git for Jamf Pro is what we created, and it brings source control and Jamf Pro together. There's a tool called Git to JSS, which is an old Python library written by Adam Furby, and Git for Jamf Pro replaces Git to JSS. There's no Python dependency. So, some people are kind of reading the writing on the wall in terms of what Apple is saying in terms of removing Python from Mac OS, but they're not letting it go, but we're kind of letting it go. So this is written in Bash, and it's very easy to execute. It's perfect for CI/CD, and it's designed for CI/CD pipelines, right? Like, we don't want to. The whole idea is we want to automate this as much as possible. We have a bunch of Jamf Pro servers. We don't want to run a command against each Jamf Pro server. We want something to do that for us. And we're going to show you kind of how we do that. And the last thing we'll talk about is it uses modern authentication to Jamf Pro, which Git to JSS doesn't. It uses bearer token authentication, so you're not going to be in an issue where soon Git for Jamf Pro is going to break and not authenticate to your Jamf Pro servers. So let's take a look. If you were to clone down that repository, what you're going to get. And hopefully you should be able to see this. So the Git for Jamf Pro script is going to be in the source code. And there are some sample scripts and EAs that you can use for testing as well. And those are in the root scripts and extension attribute folders that you'll see in the code. Within the scripts and extension attributes folders, there are a script and a record.xml file. And we'll see that here. Here's basically a subfolder with the name of the script, the script file itself, which in this case is a ZSH script, and then the record.xml, which contains kind of a sanitized version of the XML that you would get from Jamf Pro. And if you're familiar with Git to JSS, very similar to how you would use Git to JSS as well, similar structure as well. So let's take a look at the record.xml format and the properties that we have in that XML. And as I go through these, you'll kind of realize that these basically coincide with fields that you would see when you create or modify a script within Jamf Pro. So you have the name, which in this case is sample ZSH script. The category of the script, in this case, there's no category assigned. Info, this is the info box, which people should use but don't often use. The notes section, same thing. People should use this but don't really often use it. The priority of the script, in this case, this is set to the after priority. There's also before priority. And then you have some parameters, parameter 4, 5, and 6 here. These are basically the labels of those particular parameters. And then last but not least, we have OS requirements, which probably not many people use. So I'm just going to kind of take that away, but you can do that if you want. So let's take a look at how you can use Git for Jamf Pro to update scripts in your Jamf Pro server. Let's look at that process. So basically, the first thing you want to do, obviously, is clone the Git for Jamf Pro repo down to your machine. And again, everything that we're talking about in terms of our code is going to be in our GitHub. There should be a link to a landing page that you can access that at the end. So look for that there. So first, what we're going to do, once we get the repository local on our device, is we're going to download all of our scripts from Jamf Pro into our local repository on our device. And here's a sample command that you would use with Git for Jamf Pro, basically just specifying the URL, username, password, and then 2 flags, download scripts and download EAs. This is going to concurrently download scripts and EAs from Jamf Pro to your local repository. Now, you can also set a limit if you want, like say, sometimes if you Typically, if you host in Jamf Cloud, that's not going to be an issue for you. If you host on-prem and you have a small amount of resources, maybe you want to set an API limit so we're not just bombarding that server with API requests. But in this case, no limit. We're just going to concurrently download those, and it happens very fast. So the next thing we're going to do is commit all of those Jamf Pro scripts that we've pulled down locally from Jamf Pro to a remote Git for Jamf Pro repo. And this shows another sample command. Basically, we're just staging the files. We're doing a commit of the files. And we're then pushing those files to our remote Git for Jamf Pro repository. And you can use something like GitHub Desktop if you're more comfortable with that. But I just like to show the terminal commands as well. So basically at this point, the scripts in your Git for Jamf Pro repo should match what you have in Jamf Pro. So basically everything that you have in Jamf Pro should also be in your remote repository. And basically from this point on, you kind of need to make a conscious decision to not go into the script editor and make changes to your scripts, because you're kind of, if you're kind of going down this route to use Git for Jamf Pro and you're also still editing scripts within Jamf Pro locally, you're going to kind of be in a weird situation. So you have to make the choice to go down this path and stick with it and be consistent, or not. So the first step in the process, obviously, if you need to make a change to a script, you identify the change. What's broken, what needs to be updated. This command doesn't work in this version of Mac OS. You need to account for that. Whatever the change may be, you need to identify it. You make the change locally in your local repository, and you test the change. Obviously, we promote testing the change locally rather than trying to test the change in Jamf Pro. So a lot of times people want to test live basically in Jamf Pro. We kind of discourage that. So I'm marking that out. We don't want to test in Jamf Pro. We want to test locally if at all possible. And then the next thing that you're going to do is push the change to your remote Git for Jamf Pro repository. And then basically now what you have is code in source control in your remote repository, which is one commit ahead of Jamf Pro. So you have things that are up to date in source control, but not yet up to date in Jamf Pro. There's been no changes made to Jamf Pro. And this is when kind of the magic happens, right? So the magic takes place when a CI/CD pipeline is configured. So when you set up a CI/CD pipeline using Git for Jamf Pro, it will detect the commit or the push to your master branch, right? And then when that happens, the CI/CD platform, is going to run a pipeline, and we're going to execute some code within the pipeline. So the pipeline is now being ran. Pipeline starts, and one step in the pipeline is to run Git for Jamf Pro as a step, and then automatically you're going to have scripts and EAs, which we don't talk about a ton, but we talk more about scripts, updated in your Jamf Pro servers automatically. The configuration files we will provide to you as well, so that you can basically configure either in Circle CI, Bitbucket, or GitHub a sample config, which is kind of one of the things that causes people to not use tools like this. If they don't know how to set up a CI/CD pipeline, we give you sample commands to do this for 2 Jamf Pro servers, so you can update scripts within 2 Jamf Pro servers, and you basically copy, paste, and you can do it for more. So you can also run this process locally if you want, but it's really just not as rad. Git for Jamf Pro, it does work by detecting changes in the scripts between your last 2 commits, right? So it requires source control. So although you can run this locally in terminal, you do still have to leverage source control. You still have to do your staging of the files, commit, push, and then you could run Git for Jamf Pro afterwards to do your push of those changes to Jamf Pro. Now, one thing Git for Jamf Pro is not designed to do, which Git to JSS wasn't either, but it's kind of hard to figure that out because there's not a lot of documentation for Git to JSS, is this is not going to push every script in source control to Jamf Pro. Only the things that you've changed will be updated in your Jamf Pro instances. So again, it's not going to do a sync of everything. It's only the things that you've changed, because why would we need to upload a script that has not changed, right? So Git for Jamf Pro, quick topic review. Bring source control and Jamf Pro together. Allows for automating the update of Jamf Pro scripts and EAs in multiple Jamf Pro instances very easily when set up in a CI/CD pipeline. It requires source control and determines the changes between scripts, or the changes in your scripts between your last two commits in source control. And it can also allow for concurrent download of scripts and EAs from a Jamf Pro to your local machine as well, which is kind of cool. This tool is free, open source, and made to be easy to set up in your CI/CD platform. Again, we'll give you a link at the end of this that'll have sample config files. We just published this yesterday. There's a lot of documentation there to get it, set up. So take a look at that. The next tool that we've made is to kind of take care of another problem that we have, and that again, we have multiple Jamf Pro servers, and there are notifications in Jamf Pro that sometimes you might either miss. Say if you manage 30 Jamf Pro servers, and one client, rolls pretty smoothly. You don't have to log into that server very often, and potentially you don't have email notifications for a specific notification in Jamf Pro. We wanted something to help with that. So let's take a look at this tool here. So has anybody, hopefully not, ever let a cert or token expire in Jamf Pro? No one wants to raise their hand. I got it. But it does happen. And if you manage multiple Jamf Pro servers, it's something that could happen potentially more often. We always recommend, Sam mentioned this when he was talking about documentation, and when we do onboardings for Jamf, we mention this to people as well. When you create your push certificate, when you set up BVP, when you set up DEP or ADE, note the expiration date of those tokens. Make a calendar entry, create a ticket, do something, because if for some reason, some organizations don't log into Jamf Pro as frequently as we do, and they may run into an issue if one of these is going to expire. So that's one thing that you can do, but we've got something else that can help. There are a lot of notifications that Jamf Pro can actually display in the GUI. Many of you have probably not seen the majority of them. Does anybody have any idea, just take a guess, as to how many notifications can actually be displayed, or how many different types of notifications are actually displayed in Jamf Pro? Just a guess, wild guess.
It's like 50 or 60.
That's pretty close. There's 55 notifications at this point, which is like pretty crazy because we rarely see, many of those, but there are a bunch of different notifications. And you'll actually, if you look at the source code again in this, and in our repository, we actually have a link to Jamf's developer documentation, which you can actually go to see a list of those notifications as well. The notifications are kind of in a format that makes sense for programming and parsing via JSON, but you can kind of determine what those notifications actually are. And then again, if you manage a ton of Jamf Pro servers, you don't want to actually have to depend on logging into those Jamf Pro servers to see the notifications. So we're going to show you how you can get those notifications posted into a Slack channel for all your Jamf Pro servers. But first, let's take a look at Jamf Pro notifications, and just so we're all clear on what that is. This you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of Jamf Pro, this icon, and in this case, we have actually quite a few notifications in this particular Jamf Pro server. There's 10, and if you click on that, you'll see what the notifications are. And in this case, it's actually kind of cool because we're seeing some weird Java notifications for EAs. Tomcat SSL cert is expired. GSX cert is expired. So these are some examples of notifications that you would see that we don't want to have to log in to get. Let's see how we can get these in Slack, right? So we created something called Jamf Pro Notifications Alerter that sends those notifications to Slack via webhook. Here's kind of a screenshot of what it looks like in GitHub. Again, we'll have a link for that at the end. But again, it's a simple CLI tool. It's written in Bash, and it's easy to execute. You can run it as a pipeline or locally. Again, just like Git for Jamf Pro, it's best to run in a pipeline. Let's automate this. Let's not, if we're managing multiple Jamf Pro servers, let's not have something else that we're doing manually over and over again. Let's automate it as much as possible. It's designed and there are instructions to set it up into CI/CD pipelines, so we try to make it easy for you. And you can make it yours. So maybe, it is written in Bash. So if for some reason you don't use Slack, maybe use Teams, maybe you use something else that can ingest a webhook and post to some other messaging app, it should be pretty easy for you to adapt for your environment. So let's take a look at what it looks like to get a notification from Jamf Pro via the API. So this is an example curl command, and you can see the endpoint there as API v1 notifications to get all of the notifications in a Jamf Pro server. Obviously, there's some information like authentication stuff that we don't have here, but we're trying not to fill the page up with stuff that doesn't really matter in this scenario. But this is how you can get notifications from a Jamf Pro server. And some of those notifications are the push cert will expire, not is expire, will expire, so which is cool. The SSO cert will expire. GSX cert will expire. This is actually a really cool one. The Apple School Manager terms and conditions are not signed. So I think this may display in Jamf Pro now, but prior to that, it did not. So when new terms and conditions in ABM came out, you actually had to go into your ABM instances, and I've done this, accept terms and conditions in several different ABM instances. And often you know when that's going to happen, but this is also a reminder, and you'll get this reminder in Slack or with whatever, if you choose to use to adapt it to Teams, you'll get that notification in the channel every day until you fix the issue. Another one is VPP token revoked as well. So that's something you want to fix as quickly as possible. So when we run this command, let's take a look at what the response looks like from Jamf Pro. So here's a sample response. It's an array of objects, and each object contains the notification type, and in this case, the VPP account will expire. And there are some optional parameters that don't appear for each notification. The name, which this is the name of the actual token location in Jamf Pro, and then how many days until expiration. So you actually see in Slack how many days you have until that token or cert expires. So what we want to do with Jamf Pro Notifications Alerter is turn this into this. So instead of getting, seeing these notifications within Jamf Pro, these are going to come straight to a Slack channel. And what we have here is the URL of that particular Jamf Pro server, clickable. You can go right into the Jamf Pro server and fix the issue. What token is going to expire? In this case, VPP account will expire. Again, the name of that token or the location that we have here. And then in how many days it's actually going to expire. And again, if you configure this in a CI/CD pipeline that runs every day at a scheduled time, you'll see these notifications every day, and it's a good reminder for you to take care of your business. So let's do a quick topic review of Jamf Pro Notifications Alerter. So never miss another Jamf Pro cert or token expiration again. Hopefully you've never done that, but let's not ever do that. You can post those Jamf Pro notifications in a Slack channel using a webhook for each of your Jamf Pro servers. And the Slack message, again, it includes the Jamf Pro URL, notification name, how many days until it's expired, so everything you need to kind of fix the issue. And again, just like the other tools we talked about, free, open source, easy to be implemented in CI/CD with the sample configs that we provide to you, which is something that we wanted to do to make sure, again, there's a kind of a high barrier to using these tools, a high barrier of entry. And for some of the tools out there like Git to JSS, we wanted to make them as easy as possible for people to use them, leverage them, and not have any issues like some people might. So with that, thanks everyone, and I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thanks. Thanks all. Promise there's nobody else hiding over there on the other side to come up after me. I'll finish it up. So another problem that we ran into is we didn't want to type the same thing so many different times within our Jamf Pro instances with policies or scripts. So we figured out the scripts portion and being able to use Git for Jamf Pro or a migrator, whatever we needed to be able to move those scripts and things that we needed. Things like Bart here having to type in the same Jamf Pro URL for a policy in a different script in every single different instance. We didn't want to have to go through that. One thing that we leverage is the modular, we leverage Jamf variables and take an approach with modular scripts. So Jamf does a great job of allowing you to put any kind of script in there and being able to adapt the policy as needed. But being able to use variables throughout those allows us to take that one singular script that we push across all of our different environments and be able to populate the specific things we need for that particular client. Here we have the beginning of 3 example scripts. These are just purely the variables that we're looking at here that we can apply within our Jamf Pro instance and then be able to modify within a policy. The 3 that we'll kind of cover are the dep notify automated enrollment, set up your Mac automated enrollment, and remediating Jamf Protect. So here, once those variables are added into your script, within your Jamf Pro settings option, you go into a policy, and here you can see that you can choose to populate the company name, because again, if you're managing multiple instances, each company has its own different name. I hope they're not all named the same Acme Co. or Jamf or anything like that. They're gonna have a unique name. We can customize it and point it to a logo URL. This isn't something that has to exist locally on the machine. We can specify a URL to point to, so if they ever adapt their URL on their site, we can still point back to it. Your policy detail string, which is just a string of information that can supply the status of what's occurring, and then the string that it needs to call from Jamf for the policy to execute. We can check for macOS updates. We can manage the user account, so once everything's finished, we can choose to demote the user to a standard account if they started as an admin. And finally, if we just want to test things out, we can set it to a true or false statement and just test everything on a dry run and not have anything actually happen, but make sure everything's going to display correctly. Next, a newer tool that's kind of came around through Swift Dialog and Set Up Your Mac. Bart Reardon and Dan Snelson have done a great job with these 2 utilities. But with Set Up Your Mac, it required a lot of entry into the script itself, and we just didn't want to do that. So Jamf variables come into play here. Once those are added, we can look to specify if we want to do a test run with it, which just uses a true or false statement, and you can even set default values if you don't even want to type anything in. We can choose to show a welcome dialog, and the welcome dialog, all it requires is a true false statement, and once that's configured, you can actually query your Jamf Pro server to get all of your departments that are listed within there, and then provide those to the client to select the department, and then fork off of a specific workflow if needed. The last 2, we have a completion action, so whenever everything completes, what do we want to happen? Do we want it to wait for the user to click OK? If everything completes, do we want the computer to go to sleep, shut down, reboot? You can specify that in the variable. And the last is the Jamf policy array. In Set Up Your Mac, there is a large JSON array that you can specify and type out of what exactly you want the user to be displayed as what's installing, give a description about it, point to an icon, what the policy trigger is, and then how you want to verify that the software is installed. Instead of having to type all that into the script itself or even be able to supply it into the Jamf Pro variables, we went and wanted to point that instead to just a web-hosted JSON. So each of our clients have a specific URL that we can configure the JSON with, point it to that URL, and it loads into the script itself, which makes it endlessly easy instead of having to customize that full array in each script in each instance. Lastly is to remediate Jamf Protect. This is a quick and easy one. It only requires 2 different entries in here. We found that Jamf Protect, in far too many instances, we would have devices just no longer reporting into the Jamf Protect instance. They was either clogged up with logs, the client had quit, and we needed a quick way to be able to remediate, but each client has their own separate Jamf Protect instance. So we wrote out our script in a way that we had to provide 2 specific variables between the Jamf Protect tenant ID and the Jamf Protect GUID, one of which can be contained within the Jamf Protect URL. The other one is a little more detailed in the grabbing, but we have full documentation on where to grab the GUID from in the GitHub documentation that'll be at the end of this. So again, in order to adapt this, all we had to do was to have 2 variables. pointed to potential client name, Electrona, and then the GUID, which you can find within Jamf Protect, and then it's adaptable throughout all of our client instances. The next problem is dealing with changes. I was going to sing, I thought about singing, I was going to put audio in here, not feeling the singing today. Didn't want to have everything taken down, so I referenced David Bowie Changes, which is what the particular title of the topic was. So how do we keep track of all this? The Mac administration world is ever evolving thanks to the community developing and coming up with new tools to get the job done. Something new comes out and we want to create something to replace another tool in our rotation. What do? Our organization takes an approach of continuous improvement in that we look to constantly improve upon what we've done before. We never want to accept status quo. It's not if something works, don't fix it. Somebody's going to come up with something new and greater. So we deal with that in our organization through Atlassian tools. We do that either through ticket management or through projects and tasks. And again, the need for this continuous improvement comes from all of those in the great Apple community. From Mac Admin Slack to GitHub, Jamf Nation, all of those pieces provide information, direction, improvements, utilities, on and on. And with all of those resources, we find new tools and ways to handle Apple device management within our organization. So again, the improvements. We do that through ticket tracking, sprints, code review, projects, and documentation. Constant changes, new tools, we have to be able to track and implement in a way that we can stay organized and scale it to our Jamf Pro instances. Items mentioned by Ryan and Sam earlier are items that we took from an initial idea, went through a refinement stage, and then through implementation. But all that's great whenever it's just happening in our own head, but we need to have a way to be able to track what are those changes doing, whether it's been implemented, and what's been completed. So we do that typically just through, again, ticket and tracking services through Jira, either through projects or tickets. It's boring, it's horrible, but it helps and is immensely helpful when you come to the point of, we've implemented a change, we want to do this in one particular environment, how many others do we need to finish up? And we handle that all just through ticket management and tracking. With all that being said, we made as much of this as easy as possible for the community for it to be available to you all to access and be able to use in your own environments. All of our open source tools that we talked about are going to be available in our GitHub today. Items like the Jamf Pro setup documentation are easily readable, reviewable, and can be adapted to your own environment. Git for Jamf Pro, Jamf Pro notifications alerter, and even sample modular scripts are all available on our GitHub repo. The Git for Jamf Pro and Jamf Pro notifications alerter will also contain instructions and samples for your own CI/CD implementations, such as Circle CI, GitHub, and Bitbucket. After that, I'd want to turn it over to you all. Thank you all for attending and open it up for any kind of questions, concerns, comments, and anything else that you may have in the back. Let me try. There's a drink right in front of you, so I'm going to toss it straight to you.
For the script part, if I don't know if I missed something maybe at the beginning, but the variables you were saying you would have to modify them in the GUI for each server that you're doing. Is that correct? Or was there an automated way of like setting those as well?
Within each one's unique for every client instance. So you still have that manual portion of having to go in there and specify, because I guess there's not really an easy way to go about that. It's still manual.
You could do that with the API, but likely it's probably just as easy to go into the web app for that particular Jamf Pro instance, put in the company name, put in those specifics within the web app itself. But the script would be exactly the same in any of the Jamf Pro instances. You just have to adjust the variables.
Yeah. Okay.
And those variables are just adjusted in the policies.
Right.
Everything else is set within scripts and the computer management itself. It's just purely the policy that you're needing to modify to adapt those. And the convenience with those and the labeling that you get with it, you can then, if you win the lottery and say, peace out, I'm done with this, it's that much more easier to just easily see what it is that you need to type in here for whatever variable needs to be set to apply what you need.
Cool.
There you Yeah, thanks for making this, guys. Question on Git4JSS. Obviously, for new servers, when it's spinning up, it can just plop everything in there. But what are you using to uniquely identify the scripts and EAs if you're trying to implement this retroactively? Is it the ID of the EAs or scripts?
Based off the name.
Okay, so it's the name that kind of sets it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so like, for instance, if you know, we talked about a template Jampro server. Like if you had all of your scripts in the template Jampro server, those are probably the scripts that you would want to download into your Git4Jampro repository. And likely those are the ones like you may use initially Jamf Migrator to get into a new Jampro server. But as you want to make changes to those, you could use Jamf Migrator, but you're going to be doing that for, you know, a bunch of times. So that's when Git4Jampro would come in. You could make the change in your remote repository. Then your CI/CD pipeline could then push those changes to each one of your Jampro servers without you having to do that.
Cool, thanks.
Can you share the GitHub link one more time?
I think that
So-
you,
I went to that website, but I'm getting a page not found, so,
The top website,
yeah, the Mac Adams 2023.
actually, you might scroll down a little bit more.
Saying page not found response.
github.com/electrona.
Is that working for you, Chad? Okay. Is it working?
Yeah, I'll wait to go through the solutions.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Done.
All right.
Well, we'll be around if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
We have a booth set up right down there by the registration desk. So if anything does come to mind, feel free to come and find us. We'll be happy to talk.
We've also got some stickers here and some one-pagers of some of the products and services that we offer if you're interested. If you haven't gotten these from the booth that we have downstairs. Let's go.